Daniel Lubetzky graduated from the class of 1990. Many of you know him as an entrepreneur, philanthropist, an author, activist, and founder and CEO of the snack company Kind. You've got samples on your table. So when Daniel created Kind, he was on a mission to make the world a little kinder, one snack at a time. In 2003, unhappy with the unhealthy and unappetizing snack choices and concerned about the rising obesity and diabetes epidemic in America, Daniel launched Kind Snacks with the value proposition of being kind to your body, your taste buds, and your world. Kind has since become the fastest growing snack company in the United States. Established as a not only for profit, Kind is also committed to using its business as a vehicle for social change. The Kind movement inspires everyday acts of kindness, 5 million and counting. And the Kind Foundation works to create kinder, more empathetic communities. As a social entrepreneur working to build bridges between people, Daniel founded Peaceworks Incorporated, a business that fosters cooperative ventures among neighbors in the Middle East. He is also the co-founder of Mayet, a fashion brand that partners with artisans in some of the world's developing economies to create unique products while promoting self-sufficiency and entrepreneurship, and the One Voice movement, an international grassroots effort that amplifies the voices of moderate Israelis and Palestinians seeking to end the conflict. In 2015, President Barack Obama and Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker named him a presidential ambassador for global entrepreneurship for his investment in emerging entrepreneurs. Daniel is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Do the Kind Things, and if you haven't noticed, there's a table out in the foyer where you can get a copy. He has a bachelor's degree in economics and international relations from Trinity University and a Juris Doctorate degree from Stanford Law School. Trinity's 150th anniversary theme is Heirs of the Past, Stewards of the Future, and Daniel is a shining example of one of Trinity's stewards of the future. We also have some special guests with us this morning, Sonia Lubetzky, Daniel's mom, and Sioma Lubetzky, his brother. They're here with us. Please give them a round of applause. And you know, it is interesting, as Daniel was coming in, it was hard for him to get to the table because so many of you here have connections. I had many people who wanted to come and do the introduction themselves based on your personal relationship with Daniel, so I could not accommodate everyone, but please join me in giving a warm San Antonio welcome to Daniel Lubetzky.
Danny, thank you, not for inviting me to talk, but for preventing anybody else from doing the introduction. I'm really, really afraid that we're going to tell some stories about all of our crazy fun times while at Lee High School or at Trinity University. And I was planning to say thank you, and I started writing down who I was going to say thank you, but then I noticed so many other amazing friends and people as I'm walking around and seeing so many dear friends and mentors and people that have inspired me for many years. So I'm not going to name any of you out of respect to the other 50 that then I would potentially hurt. But I do want to also recognize that my mom is here, and I'll mention her a little bit later. And thank you so much, Mom, for everything you've done to educate me with values and integrity. And my brother, who is without any doubt the wiser and kinder of the two of us. And yesterday, in his eternal wisdom, he was like, there's 3 things I do not understand. One is, why would anybody want to come listen to you? Number 2 is, why would anybody want to come to a breakfast at 7:15 in the morning? And number 3 is, why would anybody want to come at 7:15 to listen to you? And I couldn't agree more, but I'm so grateful and thankful that a few of you guys disagree, and I'm very honored to be here with you today. I want to start by where this all actually started, which is at Trinity University. Prior to Trinity, when I was raised in Mexico and when I was in Lee High School, I just had fun and I breezed through, but I didn't really apply myself. And even at Trinity, at the beginning, I started getting really intellectually stimulated, but I was mentioning to Danny yesterday, like at 2 or 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, I was cramming till the very last minute to catch up with all the studies for the last 6 months I hadn't done. But on my junior year, Dr. Guy Poitras, I decided to do a thesis, and he said, you need to choose a topic, so start thinking about it. So for 6 months to a year, I got a chance to think about it, and I was studying abroad, and when I was studying abroad in Israel, I started learning about the influence of economics in Arab-Israeli relations, and when I came back, I decided to write my thesis of the influence of economics in resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict, and you can see that we've resolved it also beautifully, so you can sit down and finish our breakfast. But the theory, not the practice yet, the theory of economic cooperation is that as you foster cooperation between people and they trade and do business with one another, Israelis, Palestinians, Egyptians, Jordanians, Turks, that cooperation helps people interact, that interaction helps shatter cultural stereotypes, and then also the vested economic incentives in preserving those relationships help people cement bonds that, years later, after having created Peaceworks 25 years later, have stood the test of time, and in spite of all the vicissitudes of the conflict, our very imperfect venture of Peaceworks, which was born from the theory from my college thesis, still strives to bring Israelis, Palestinians, Egyptians, Turks, and Jordanians to interact with one another and trade with one another. And there were a ton of mistakes made, and I'm going to share a couple of them now, but just crossed my mind to share that there's a Peaceworks 2.0 in the making, and it's in partnership with the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. The king is personally very invested in the concept. Kind today buys about 1% of the world's almonds, and the challenge with almonds is that about 85% of them are grown in the Central Valley of California, where there's a lot of droughts. So as people discover all the health benefits of almonds, the demand for them is increasing and the supply is quite limited because almonds are very temperamental, like our family. And when you try to grow almonds, they've tried in Texas, they've tried in Virginia and Arizona, and the climate conditions are not quite perfect for them. They require Mediterranean climate. But you know where they have a Mediterranean climate? In the Mediterranean. So you got it right, pardon. So we're trying to see if we can do pilot projects to use cutting-edge Israeli technology to irrigate, do drip irrigation. We're starting in Jordan. We may eventually also do projects in Israel and in Palestine. But the concept is to use cooperation to bring neighbors together, Israeli technology to provide to Jordanian Bedouins. There's a huge issue with Syrian refugees, over 1 million Syrian refugees in Jordan, and hopefully creative mechanisms will be used to help integrate them into society to create stability and stuff. But let's go back to the fun years where I knew nothing. Still, I don't know that much, but back then I really, really didn't. And my brother and I started a couple of the things together. When I decided to try to turn this theory into practice, because first I thought I was going to be a consultant, and I started trying something called METIC, the Middle East Trade and Investment Center. It sounded really good, but it was just a name, and nobody wanted to consult with a confused Mexican-American Jew living in the US trying to tell Arabs and Israelis how to work together. I know it sounds like a joke, but that was actually the business plan. And when I realized that nobody wanted to listen to my ideas, I decided to try it myself. I was first in Israel when I was doing some research, and I came across this obscure-looking jar of sun-dried tomato spread. And back then, sun-dried tomatoes were not as well known as they are today. So I bought it, I downed the whole jar in my first sitting, and I went back to buy some more, and there was no more. And I asked the store what had happened, and apparently the company had gone out of business. So I reached out to the manufacturer through the distributor in the store, and I befriended him, and I told him about my concepts for Peaceworks and how to bring economic cooperation. And he decided to give it a shot because he had no real other options. He had just gone bankrupt because he was buying his glass jars from Portugal, and he was buying his sun-dried tomatoes from Italy, and we researched that he could buy his glaciers from Egypt and his sun-dried tomatoes from Turkey, and he could buy his olives and olive oil and basil from Palestinian farmers, and his eggplant from Jordanian farmers, and manufacture in Israel, and that's how Peaceworks was born. And it's still alive today, but it's a very, very small company, but still has a very big place in my heart. But I remember when my brother and I were trying, the brand originally was called Moshe Pupik and Ali Mishmunken's World Famous Gourmet Foods. Very succinct name. And the only famous thing it had was that my mom and my dad were like, "Oi, what are you doing with your law school education and your Trinity education selling sun-dried tomato spreads?" And Siom and I were trying to sell them in a shopping mall, and people were like, "Who are these people?" Along that beginning, it wasn't clear that I was going to go into food, and we were also testing Dead Sea minerals because there was a venture where Bedouins were cooperating with Israeli Jews, making Dead Sea minerals that made your skin very, very smooth. Here, I still have some left in case anybody wants. I decided to try this concept. Danny, I hope I don't bore you and Michael with the story that I shared yesterday, but I decided to try the skincare space to see. It was all about trying to find products that could be made through these joint ventures. So I ordered 500 Dead Sea minerals with aromatherapy oils and 500 hand treatment creams and 500 soaps of this and that type. And I said, just ship them to me. And my studio apartment in New York City back then was probably the size of this podium. And one day they rang the doorbell and they said, "We have your shipment." I'm like, "Oh yeah, please come bring it up." And the guy's like, "I don't know what you're talking about, please come downstairs." And I go downstairs and it's a 20-foot trailer because I didn't know what I was doing, and 500 of each of these 7 things, it was actually very bulky. And I very quickly filled up my entire studio. I had a futon from my college and law school years, and there was like a mountain of boxes on the top, and there was boxes all around. And any task required incredible juggling skills. So I had to go in between the boxes, up and down. It was a very big commitment if I wanted to get a bowl of cereal because it took longer to get there than it took to consume the calories from the cereal. And right now I say it very fondly, but there were moments where I remember, along with those Dead Sea minerals whose pungent smell prevented me from having any social life because nobody wanted to date me. They all thought I was running a spa, like the authorities came and inspected. That's a joke, but everything else was true. And along with that, I remember one day I brought this sun-dried tomato spreads into my apartment, or they shipped them, and they had broken, the jars had broken on the way in. And I had my savings. I was trying to not bug my parents to have them help me out. They always were there for me, but I was trying to do things on my own. And so I had really used up all of my law school, my legal job savings and stuff, and I had the shipment come in, and it was all broken. All the jars were oozing olive oil, and I remember the olive oil oozing through the wood floor, and the smell of the sun-dried tomatoes in olive oil combining with the aromatherapy jojoba oil. And right now it's really a lot of fun to reflect. I don't know why we, 20 years after tragedies, can look at them with funness, but back then I remember sitting down and crying. I remember like thinking, what the hell am I doing? I could be working at a law firm, I could be doing something else, and nobody was calling to buy my Dead Sea minerals. I couldn't sell them for the life of me. And it was 10 years that I thought I was doing fine, but in retrospect, compared to kind, it was very, very difficult. And still I kept going. And it never dawned on me to give up on the Peaceworks concept, because it was so much bigger than me. It was about trying to have an impact in society, about having to use economics as a bridge for connecting Israelis with all of their neighbors and giving people a reason to work together and make money rather than war. And my problems were relatively small compared to the things that we were trying to tackle. That's one of the things that purpose does for you. It gives you staying power greater than when you are just trying to make a dollar. And fortunately, after 10 years of mistakes with the venture, we had $1 or $2 million in business. And very shortly before the founding of Kind, I was importing a line of products that were kind of predecessors of what we now make as Kind Bars. And the manufacturer, we didn't have control of the manufacturing. Back then it wasn't our brand. I had started importing those products. And then they decided to replace some of the ingredients, and they started adding sorbitol and sulfur dioxide. Can you remind me what the other ingredient was? Whoever picks up the phone. We had to advise the natural trade because all of our products at that time were being sold into natural food stores. And we lost all of our business overnight. It was like 2 years of working to sell these products, about $1 million in sales that we just evaporated, which was truly putting the sustainability of our business at risk. It was very, very likely that we were not going to be able to survive. And I remember that I was not able to pay myself my $24,000 a year salary, and I barely was able to pay the salaries of my 6 or 7 team members. And we were trying to think, should we launch Kind or not? And we had a round table with our team where we talked about it. And I have a team member who just recently retired named Rami Leshem, who was my head of sales back then. And I remember talking to him and saying, maybe it's time for us to just wrap this thing up, the venture that was about to become Kind. And I shared this yesterday with some students because it's one of those moments where you realize how tenuous your professional life and all of our lives are, and how these little decisions can make such a difference, because we decided to stay on and not to give up. And 1 year later, Kind was $1 million business, and another year later was a $2 million business, and then a $4 million, and then 7 or 8, and then 15, and it kept growing. Every year it more or less doubled for 10 years in a row. And it grew to become one of the most respected healthy snack businesses in the United States and in the world. And I'll talk for a second more about Kind's business stuff to give you a little bit of a sense of the business, but then I want to go back to the topic of today, which is purpose. But Kind today is probably the only company that I know of in the world, and when I've talked to people in the industry, nobody's come up with a different example, that at this scale where we sell over $1 billion at retail a year, the entire portfolio has not made any sacrifices. The entire portfolio is made up of products where the first ingredient is always something nutritionally rich, like almonds or 100% whole grains or a whole fruit. And I'm not just comparing to candy or potato chips or ice cream. I'm comparing even in the health and wellness space, even in the nutritional bar set where most of our products compete. Of the 10 leading brands, Kind is the only one whose ingredients you can see and pronounce, and that is made up of first and foremost. Yes, I know, that's our motto, but when people hear it, like, it sounds crazy. Ingredients you can see and pronounce, but the industry is so deluged with stuff that you don't even know what it is and you can't recognize it. And the first ingredient in all of our competitors' ingredients is some form of refined flours or refined sugars. Like our leading competitor's number one ingredient is organic brown rice syrup, which is a form of sugar. It's just another name for sugar. Another of our leading competitors is organic tapioca syrup, which is also just a form for sugar. We have two competitors whose first ingredient is date paste. And date paste is a fruit, but it's really, really high in sugar. And all of those ingredients cost anywhere between 2 and 12 times less. Refined flour, refined sugar costs 25 to 37 cents a pound. A pound of almonds is $2.85. And a couple of years ago when there was a bad drought, it's $5.50. And yet, if you don't pay for it when you're consuming the product, you're going to pay for it in the hospital. The Almond Council gave me $20 to share this advertisement, but there was a study in the New England Journal of Medicine that people that consumed tree nuts lived on average 3 years longer than people that don't. And there's a ton of cardiovascular and health benefits to consuming tree nuts. So one of the things I'm very proud of what Kind does is that every day millions of people improve their well-being by consuming products that are nutritionally rich and that displace empty calories. But what excites me the most is honoring my dad's memory by trying to inspire kindness in the world. And Marty went there yesterday, introduced me at an event we had at Trinity where he talked about a story of my dad's. And there are many stories that my dad shared about how horrible a time he had. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was 9 years old when the war started, 11 years old where his family was very, very deeply impacted and almost assassinated, but spared because of the kindness of a person that was not a good person. That was another thing in Marty's presentation that it's an even more interesting story because this man, the superintendent, who walked every other family through the building and pointed to the paramilitary forces for them to be able to kill all the Jewish families. At some time before that, he had asked my dad, who back then was a little kid, "Hey, are you hungry?" And my dad said, "Yes." He said, "Come, I'll show you where there's food." And he walked them to the street and he showed them a pile of dead bodies. And he said, "Here, those are Jews. Take a piece of them. Take a bite." And he was a little kid. And this man, who was an evil person, he was not a kind person. When the paramilitary forces were walking down that building and pointing to the Jewish families for them to be assassinated, he told the paramilitary forces to spare my grandfather's family, my dad's family. And then he approached my grandfather and said, "Mr. Lubetzky, you know why I spared you, family? Because every day you looked at my eyes and you treated me with kindness. And every year during the holidays you gave me my bottle of schnapps and you treated me with respect. So I'm sparing your life, but leave now before I change my mind." And the thought that I live because of the kindness of a bad person who was treated well and saw that modicum of humanity at that very critical point haunts me and inspires me to try to never give up on the very important quest of building bridges in our world. And we live in a world today that is on the brink of making huge mistakes again. Over the last 50 to 70 years, after the horrors of the Holocaust and World War II, we've seen an incredible growth in values that we've taken for granted for too long. Liberal democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and that very essential element that here in America has made us, in my opinion, the greatest nation to have ever existed. I'm very, very proud of having immigrated to the United States and of being part of a system that, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, it's the worst of all systems except for all others. And so capitalism and democracy are absolutely not perfect, but we haven't found a better alternative. We need to improve on capitalism to make it a conscious form of capitalism. I'll talk to that in a minute. And we need to try our best to not allow democracy to be usurped. But an essential ingredient in the American experiment has been the respect and civility and kindness and ability to listen to those that have different perspectives from us that America has been characterized by or with. And San Antonio, Texas, where I moved and I lived 5 very, very special years of my life, showed me that ability to build those bonds. And San Antonio, Texas, still today, in spite of, yesterday I was hearing some people comment about how now there's so many divisions even in San Antonio, and I'm sure that's the case because it exists in all of our nation and exists in all of our world. But San Antonio has very important and secret ingredients that can be used for the rest of the world and certainly for the rest of our country as examples of how we need to find a way to not dismiss those that have different perspectives from ours, to try to be critical listeners, to try to be critical thinkers. And I want to challenge all of you with this thought experiment, whether you're from the left or the right or the center. When was the last time that you had a critical belief in a politician or in a party that when data, when facts came up that controverted that insight or that perspective, you were able to look at those facts in the face and accept them and change your mind about something? When was the last time that you, not the other, which is so easy for us to say, oh, those guys don't reflect. When was the last time that you changed your mind about something? And this is a critical challenge for all of us because it's so easy that once we've informed our beliefs, that we take information to affirm rather than inform our beliefs. And it's really, really important that sometimes we be comfortable accepting the uncomfortable work of saying, well, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this data point indicates that I shouldn't be so in love with this politician or with this political creed or something, because regardless of where you come, a lot of these politicians are manipulators, and we need to build critical thinkers and critical listeners that can think for themselves and challenge these abuses. And across the world, the rise of populism and of extremism, of totalitarian forces, is really threatening our world with some very, very dark times. And the greatest antidote to that is an informed population that's going to question things critically and not allow people to manipulate us. I didn't know this was going to become a political speech from the political science department. Neither did Danny. I'm like, hey, dude, relax. Come on. It's 8 a.m. in the morning. But I do think that San Antonio has a very important role to play in being an example to the world. And going back to what I discovered on this journey, I discovered that a commitment to something greater than us helps in so many incredible ways. Like at Kind, because I had been bitten by the bug of Peaceworks being able to try to run a business in a sustainable way, but also to make a social impact, I wanted to do the same thing at Kind. And so not only did we make products that were nutritionally rich, but also we have for the last 15 years done our best to foster empathy and kindness and respect in my dad's memory, and to try to encourage people to treat each other with dignity. And we have a bunch of measures that we do. We have 400 team members that are Kind ambassadors that promote our products but also do it with kindness. We have a program called howkindofyou.com, where any of you at any point on an honor system can give free Kind products to other people that show kindness. So if you spot a person that did a kind act, on our dollar, you can send them free Kind products. And we've had millions of people participate in the program to celebrate somebody's act of kindness. And also, if I'm walking and I notice somebody doing a kind act, I have these cards called Kind Awesome cards, where, like, you know, if I'm walking by and somebody does something kind, or I try to approach them and then they run away and they call the police, because it's New York City, it's not San Antonio. But after I explain it to the police and they take off my handcuffs, then I able to explain to them, no, I was just trying to give you a Kind Awesome card, dude. But the Kind Awesome cards send that kind person to Kind bars and the opportunity to become a Kind ambassador. And this is one of the things we do. The thing that I'm most proud of and most excited about that I've helped be part of is the creation of the Empatico platform. And Empatico, imagine that it's like an Uber or Airbnb platform that connects you, but instead of connecting you to a car service or to an apartment, it connects classrooms to one another. It allows, because if a teacher today wants to expand their kids' horizons, it's a lot of work. It's very hard for them there is no matchmaking mechanism. And this creates a community that already has 7,000 schools across 100 nations, all 50 US states. Tens of thousands of children have been impacted, and it's only in year 2. And we hope to scale it so that millions of children's horizons will be expanded, and kids are going to be able to learn, kids in Memphis, Tennessee, connecting with kids in southern New Jersey, an all-black school connecting with an all-white school, and learning and discovering each other's humanity, or kids in Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, connecting kids in Lagos, Nigeria, and they can complete tasks that are required in school. Like there's modules that if the teachers can decide to let just the kids discover each other and talk to each other, or they can complete assignments where they're learning about the weather or learning about cartography, but they can do it in a real way by connecting with their fellow citizens of the world. And it's at a critical intervention point of the ages of 7 to 11 years old, where kids are either going to be told by their father, you are superior to those other ones are infidels, you shall never trust them and you should destroy them because our religion is superior. Or your mother or father is going to say, look, you should be very proud of who you are and where you come from, but also recognize we're all in this together. And purpose can fuel at so many different levels any type of effort or enterprise. It gets my team really, really energized to work harder. It creates value for our stakeholders because when it's authentic, it creates more loyalty from consumers. It gives me more meaning because I feel so much better about what I try to do every day because I feel like I'm doing something bigger than me. And it's very important for society because in this day and age where there's so many enormous challenges that we're facing, like the ones I mentioned about threats to liberal democracy or climate change or plastic in our oceans or a ton of things that I talk with. Michael, the head of our philanthropies, is here with us, and thank you for coming, Michael, and joining us here in San Antonio. He was here 20 years ago, and so now he discovers how awesome San Antonio still is and is growing. But there's enormous challenges that we're going to face with droughts, with food scarcity, resource scarcity, and the only way we're truly going to tackle them is we create creative mechanisms that can scale and that can sustain themselves. And the power of market forces, of using business for social good, is that business by itself has that ability to scale and sustain itself because you're creating products or services that you're selling, and it creates the mechanism for that, for those ventures to be able to maintain themselves and grow themselves sustainably, as opposed to very important nonprofit work that I also do and others do, but which every year you have to pass out the hat or find a way to raise money for it. But when you're able to create self-sustaining mechanisms, they can scale much faster. So I really think that the private sector is going to be an essential part of the solution if we are to tackle these problems together. I want to just end with two quick thoughts. One of them is that one of the things that Trinity taught me and that my mom taught me was that it's not the destination only that matters, but it's also the journey. And it's not the ends, but also the means. And you may want to try to change the world, but every step on the way, how you behave every single day, how you treat people every single day, matters so much. And my mom's always been like the eternal friend. And the reason why we have a lot of people here today has nothing to do with me, is that she probably is friends with everybody and their grandmother. It struck me to think about this thought for the last several years, that sometimes there's people that are doing very, very important work and that I, from afar, respect very deeply, but then you get close to them and you realize that they're absolute jerks. And it's really interesting to observe how people think that they're doing something great and important, transcendental for the world, but they're, I guess I can't use words there, close in their daily lives, and treat the taxi driver or the waiter or their help. And just to be clear, I'm as imperfect as everybody else, and I make mistakes, and sometimes I'm not the best coach that I'd like to be to my children, to my team members, but trying every single day to become a better human being, as my mom and my dad taught us, is probably even more important, because that's how we're changing the world every day. And so at Trinity, the integrity with which we approach things, the community that was built was really, really remarkable. And the honor code that Trinity lives by, something that I think impacted me still today. And I was walking with Mike yesterday through the hallways, and he showed me all of the students had signed their honor core pledge. And I think it's a very special part of American culture and of Trinity culture that we should not take for granted. And I'll just end by sharing that this all would not exist if it wasn't because of Trinity's approach to critical thinking and to interdisciplinary education and a liberal arts education. Because at KIND, we talk about something we call the AND philosophy, thinking with AND rather than thinking with OR. So instead of saying the product is going to be healthy or tasty, you need to make a choice, or the company is going to be economically sustainable or socially impactful, or the product is going to be wholesome or convenient. You challenge that false paradigm, that false compromise, and you say, what's the underlying assumption that's making me think that I need to make that choice? Not always. Sometimes you need to say, or there are choices in life, right? You can't always, but when you can think creatively and out of the box, sometimes you find ways to achieve two objectives that seem to be at odds with each other. And when you do that is when you create enormous amount of value for society. And the thinking that helps you think that way is that interdisciplinary liberal arts thinking that Trinity taught us. So thanks to the Trinity community and the San Antonio community for everything you taught me. And I think we're going to do a little of Q&A. So thank you. Stop applauding, or then we won't be able to do questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm inspired. I wonder if you have any thoughts about I agree with you that the private sector's importance in making successful solutions to the challenges that face us is important. We're going to need more companies to conduct themselves the way that KIND does. Have you had any observations, or do you have any thoughts about how an existing company that has already established its market share, its business strategy, its systems, how might it alter itself and become kind?
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question in case someone didn't hear it, but it's how do we get corporate actors to elevate their values and the approach that they work with and act with more kindness? The first thing I would say is that I actually do not believe that this is an issue of small versus big, and that the small companies are necessarily have more integrity than the large companies. I've seen some incredibly big companies with deep cultural values and commitments that are not any less than small companies, and I've seen small companies that cut corners and think they can fool the consumer. So it's not an issue of size. And I also would say that it's really, really important that it be authentic. And, connecting the thought I said about the everyday steps vis-a-vis the big things. Like, I think in life and in business, it's authenticity and transparency are of extraordinary importance, because the consumers are very sophisticated and they can tell where they're being marketed and where it's just a gimmick or an artificial thing and not an authentic commitment. And I think there's a lot of businesses that play a critical role in life because, as we were speaking yesterday, they're providing jobs, they're providing solutions. The reason why capitalism works and market system works is because it's a very efficient way to distribute. Professor Butler's looking at me, and he was one of my economics professors, so I hope I'm getting really intimidated how I'm going to explain this stuff. Please, Professor Butler, come here. But, see, now I forgot what I was talking about. But businesses have a critical role to play in just providing jobs, just providing opportunities. And when people like their products or the services, you're creating enormous value just from that. Now, I do believe that in the coming days and years, and it's already happening, like the world that I entered in the business world 20, 30 years ago is very different from the world today, in that millennials are much, much more focused on looking at who's behind the products or services that they get, and they really, really care. Like my 10-year-old son is extraordinarily concerned about fish and wildlife and the environment and the oceans, and appropriately so, because that generation is going to really, really suffer if we don't get our act together. And there's going to be an elevation of expectations on all companies over time, because as we all acquire more information, as we get more educated, as our standards of living increase, not just in the US, but across the world, people demand more and more and more from corporate actors. So I just think that the base will increase. And as far as becoming leaders in social impact, it will happen if the companies authentically care about it. But I prefer a company that authentically just handles itself with integrity, but doesn't proclaim to be trying to change the world unauthentically. Of course, I prefer if they authentically are doing something that's meaningful and with integrity, and they walk the walk and talk the talk. Next to that, I think would be a company that is just handling every single day with respect and integrity, but it doesn't particularly do something extraordinarily remarkable beyond. And then, start getting down the line to the companies that are actually bad actors. And maybe Professor Butler has a solution to those, but I don't.
We'll talk later.
Any other questions?
You were trained as an economist and a lawyer. How did you gain the expertise in agriculture and manufacturing that you would need to make this product?
Yeah, so the question was, you were trained as an attorney and an economist, and how the hell are you running a food company? And I ask myself the same question every day. And I think my team asks the same questions, like, what is this guy doing? Get some real people to run this business. But I learned the hard way. I had a lot of great mentors. I had Ben from Ben & Jerry's was on my initial board. My dad was on our initial board. We had 11 people that were mentors of mine and that guided me and taught me stuff. I think I learned business slightly so osmosis from watching my dad, and I learned a lot from other people, and I learned a lot from mistakes. From just the book that I wrote, Do the Kind Thing, is actually organized to share mistakes I made during the Peaceworks years, how I accepted those lessons, and then how those lessons helped me figure things out at Kind. So there's a real clear connection to the mistakes from my first venture to the successes of the second. But even in the second one, we make mistakes and then we correct and learn. So a lot of it was just by learning the hard way and making a lot of costly mistakes. Any other questions?
Can you speak to,
I feel really powerful. Yes, you.
can you speak to your logos, your colors, and how they promote kindness?
Our logo, our colors, and how they provoke kindness. So it's a special hypnotic, powerful thing. When you see them, just get in trance and you shall be kind. The inspiration for the logo came from Sasha Hare, who back then was our head of marketing, and she guided her concept was, she gets credit for this. Her concept was she wanted the different elements of life, of nature, of the world. So the blue was the sky or the water, the green was nature, the red was fire, and then the yellow was earth. And so they were the essential elements in nature. And I'm very blessed and lucky that we got that one right, because it's a very iconic logo. It really has a lot of mental imprint impact. And the word kind came from inspiration of my dad. You know, the interesting thing also that I forgot to share is that kind was conceived in one of the toughest years of my life, because my dad had just passed away. He passed away on January 8th of 2003, and that's the year that we were designing kind. And when I was writing the book, Do the Kind Thing, I searched through my emails, and I found the emails where we were going back and forth trying to decide the name of the company. And it's hilarious to see some of the other contenders. And you might think, oh my God, this guy's a marketing genius. He came up with kind. But if you had seen the other names that Sasha and I were considering, you say, this guy may be the stupidest person in the world. And so actually, when you're trying to be creative, you actually need a process where you come up with a ton of ideas, and you welcome the dumb ideas, and you welcome the things that might seem to make no sense, and you cannot introduce to the creative process the filtering process of logic. Because if you do that, you will stifle that creativity. So you need to separate the creative process where everything is fair from the more analytical process, which has to be introduced afterwards. And after we came up with a bunch of names, we struggled actually with the name. It was not clear that it was going to be kind, but we wanted to, this was also, it was Sasha and I together, but Carrie inside this, she wanted an adjective that could describe humanity and our products. So that's why our motto is do the kind thing for your body, for your taste buds, and for your world. Do the kind thing for your body is by eating nutritionally rich ingredients. For your taste buds is because they're delicious, and for your world is by inspiring kindness. And the reason we chose kind, my dad was very much in my mind at that year when he had passed away, it's the word that described him best. And we have a lot of friends of my mom and dad's that got to know my father, and I think would say the word that best described him was being kind. Do you want us to wrap up? Sorry to the others that I talked too long.
No, not too long. Join me. Round of applause for Daniel.